Good morning, everyone, and welcome to It's a New Day. I'm Kim Kennedy, your host for this segment. In this pre-recorded conversation with Patricia Wenskunas, we are grateful that she's taken time out of her busy schedule to visit with us. She has some important information to share with us. Patricia is a survivor of a violent crime and the founder of the organization Crime Survivors. You can find out more about the organization at crimesurvivors.org. Patricia nearly died in 2002 when she was viciously attacked in her own home by someone she trusted. A personal trainer whom she knew and trusted from her local gym arranged to stop by her condo one day, ostensibly to help her sell a piece of exercise equipment. Once there, he rendered her unconscious with a pill that he claimed would help her lose weight. When Patricia came to, she found she was undressed with the trainer on top of her. While she struggled to get away, the trainer threatened to kill her 12-year-old son, who was not home at the time. Now enraged, the attacker attempted to suffocate her with a plastic kitchen wrap. With her last surge of adrenaline, Patricia broke free but found herself with nowhere to run. With her life hanging in the balance, she made a daring 12-foot leap from her balcony to the hard kitchen floor below. After what seemed like an eternity, she finally made it to the door. Once outside, she screamed into the street for help. This was not the end of Patricia's ordeal. What ensued next was a labyrinth of journey through the criminal justice system. At times, it seemed that the system was far more interested in protecting the man who attacked her than it was in securing justice for her. Equally important, it didn't seem to care about protecting society from her attacker being released to commit additional attacks on other women. Perhaps next time, she thought, he might even be successful, quote-unquote, at killing one or more of them. In the end, Patricia's attacker served all of 120 days in prison for assault with a deadly weapon and making criminal threats. The judge threw out the charges of attempted murder. Wow. Patricia vowed to do something about the attack and its aftermath by founding Crime Survivors. Always referring to herself as a survivor, never a victim, she became a timeless advocate on behalf of those who have endured situations similar to her own. She does it with an optimistic tone, believing that life after a violent attack begins in one's state of mind. A frequent public speaker on the subject, she is dedicated to the notion that with community support, respectful advocacy, and hopeful healing, one can survive a violent crime and even thrive in their personal lives. Well, Patricia, welcome, and we're so thankful that you survived, and ultimately God was watching after you and protected you. And I'm thankful that you are in the line of work that you are, as I have to imagine that sometimes it's difficult, but thinking about others and trying to shine light on a system that has gone way wrong. And so I don't even know where to start. That was quite an overwhelming introduction. If you could tell us about after the attack and working through your feelings. This was a trusted friend, your trainer, someone you thought well of. What ensued right after that as you processed all of that?
Well, thank you so much for having me today. And, it's not always easy. It's not easy getting on, radio shows or TV shows or in front of large audiences or small groups to share. Sometimes it triggers me, but I do know one thing, that on April 4th of 2002, I made a promise to God, because with faith there is hope, and I'm a strong believer, and I believe that on that day when I made that promise, that with every next breath, I would live for community above self. And all these years later, I feel that I'm still living for community above self. I also feel like there was hope for healing for my personal life, to break the cycles of victimization, and to pass it on to other people, to let them know whatever you endure in your life, you can have hope, you can have healing, and you can survive and thrive. And so I am a survivor today. I feel like I was victimized, but I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor that's thriving, and I'm going to have moments the rest of my life, and I know that, and that's okay, that I can work through those. But I feel like I have a passion and a purpose. I feel like I've been blessed with a gift to be able to help other survivors know they're not alone, to be able to bring awareness to our communities that crime happens everywhere. How do we prevent crime from happening? I'm also an advocate for survivors and for public safety. And how do we heal and survive and thrive? Where do we go to get help and support? Most people don't know where to go get that. I stood up for myself for the first time in my life after everything happened. And I was able to get a judge removed from the bench for her behavior. I was able to, I hopefully believe that I was able to change a system for the most part, be able to work on Marcy's Law effortlessly to get that passed in the state of California. The sad reality is although I feel like I've worked day in and day out and committed my life, life to this movement, I feel like all these years later, my commitment in a sense has also failed because I look at our state, I look at our nation, and I see, laws like AB 109, Prop 47, Prop 57, taking away bail, the Arnold tool, the Arnold Foundation wanting to just release criminals back into our streets. You can claim mental illness now and murder someone and get away with it, or rape or sexually assault someone and get away with it.
Or be an illegal alien and get away with it.
Correct. And that's the sad reality, is that we're living in a very challenging time today. It's not a victim-friendly nation right now.
And that is tragic, and that is so wrong. It's heartbreaking, and it ought not to be. As you're talking, I'm thinking about, some in the DNC who are crying out for not only doing away with borders, but like you said, shutting down the police and opening up, the prisons. This stuff isn't made up. This is actually being said from the left. And that would be catastrophic. It would be horrible, especially could you imagine if they were successful in destroying the Second Amendment? It would be worse than the Wild, Wild West days. And we need a return to justice and defining what is justice. And if you do a crime, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and that isn't harsh. That's actually just. The crime and the punishment should be equal to one another, Patricia.
You would think so. I mean, the fear is setting in to think that our forefathers are probably rolling over in their grave. They would have never imagined or thought that we would be in a position where we're in today, where they're releasing, thousands of molesters that molested children, thousands of murderers. They would not think that we would lose our Second Amendment right. And I hope that we never do, because I believe in our Second Amendment right is to protect ourselves. And, they label things as saying now they are saying the offenders, the criminals, are actually the victims. And everywhere I go in meetings, I hear something like, well, that's the victim. And I'm like, no, that's not the victim. That so-called victim had a gun in his hand shooting it at cops. And you're calling him a victim. Well, yeah, he was a victim of the community, of public safety, of law enforcement. He was a victim of the circumstance. I'm like, no, that's not the victim. So it's very challenging. It's very devastating. And when you think about it, who's speaking up? Victims are afraid to speak up. They're afraid to come to the media or press conference. Now, some do, but others are challenged because their fear of retaliation, their fear that, and it's not that they're afraid of law enforcement, it's afraid that there's going to be no justice in the system.
That's true. And I'm not going to pass a judgment because I don't know what I would do in those circumstances if you're not in a position to pick up and move halfway across the world or the country or something. I wonder if you could tell our listeners a little bit about the Laura and John Arnold Foundation and what you think of their risk assessment tool.
I'm not an absolute expert on it, but I will say that they're not transparent with it. When they released it,
who is the foundation for Patricia? Who is this? What is this foundation? Who is the? What is the
Arnold? It's the Arnold Foundation, and it's the Arnold Foundation Risk Assessment Tool, and it's basically what they're basically trying to do too is they're trying to take away bail. They're calling it bail reform. The Arnold tool. They're trying to release people, basically on their own word, to basically say we don't need a bail system. They want to basically say that they want to use a computer system, in essence, to be able to say if an offender is a high risk or not a high risk. I can't even imagine trusting a computer to save my Microsoft Word document or keep my information safe. So now they're putting together a computer score to basically say, well, this person murdered or this person raped or this person beat his wife. Is he a high risk? Is he somebody that is going to reoffend again? But the problem is they weren't transparent in all of this. Is it a high risk? Is it a low risk? How did they get to that to say it's a high risk or low risk? Have they talked to the victim that was victimized? Who are they talking to, or they're just leaving it basically up to a computer? And if you look at different places that have been using this system, New Jersey, Mexico, it's an epic failure. It's not working. People are being released, and then they're going out and reoffending. Again, I sent them a letter they did not respond to myself or our organization as a nonprofit organization helping victims. They didn't even have the respect to respond to us and tell us, how does this system work? We don't even know how the system works, so how can it really ultimately work if they're not telling us how it was set up to work?
Those are great questions. And I'm sure the people who thought of this had the best motives in mind, but the practical outworking doesn't sound very good.
It doesn't. And they're basically trying to, what they're saying is, we believe in second chances. We believe in people, getting out and rehabilitating themselves, getting back into the community. And what about the victims that are living basically a life sentence after being victimized? What about the people like the bail bondsmen that are trying to, and they get a bad rap, in all honesty, because people say, oh, well, they're releasing. But, I'm a survivor. I'm a victim, and I believe in the bail system. I believe in the bail bondsmen because I believe that, in essence, they're going to get these people back to court. They're going to hold this person liable and responsible to attend through our legal process, our legal system, to be able to hopefully get justice for the victims. And without them, if someone's released, what's the guarantee that this person is going to go back to court? What's the guarantee they're just not going to just go off, re-victimize somebody else and go to another country or something? And that does happen. I've heard of that happening. So it's not just, it's not fair, and it should not be part of our justice system.
Do you happen to know offhand what the statistics are for repeat offenders? People get released who shouldn't, and they commit a crime again?
It depends on what county, depends on what state. It varies, from state to state. Depends on where they're at, depends on what the crime is. And, most of the statistics are years behind. So I don't want to quote something and then, it not be accurate, but I can always get you that information.
Well, what convenient is that? I just happened to be looking at a report from April 23rd of 2014, saying that within 5 years of release, 82% of property offenders were arrested for a new offense, 77% of drug offenders, 74% of public order offenders, and 71% of violent offenders. So I'm not sure how reliable that is coming from a CBSNews.com report. But I would suggest, listeners, you do your own homework. I would also suggest, Patricia, that one of the things our modern system doesn't deal with is treating the spiritual aspect of asking the question, why do people commit crimes? We look at, rightfully so, socioeconomic conditions, but we don't examine the human heart, which is where all of our problems originate. Your attacker was lusting after you, was working with you for some time, and was devising a plan to put you in a position. It's obvious from the details that he had thought this out, plotted this out. And that's called sin, right? That is in the heart of every human being. And, I am an admirer of Chuck Colson, who has the Prison Fellowship Ministry, and other churches, countless number of churches who have prison ministries, outreach, sharing the gospel, the good news that you can be free from control of your sin nature. And I would call that permanent rehabilitation. I would hasten to add, a person gets right with God and says, oh, well, it doesn't matter about my crime anymore. No, it doesn't work like that. Some of the decisions we make in life have much greater impact and can't be just waved away with a wand and, everything's okay. But it does, in many instances, give people a new lease on life and helps them to get their lives turned around if they truly had trusted Christ for their salvation and getting a new heart, spiritually speaking. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I live every day with faith. There is hope. I would not be breathing if it wasn't for God giving me my next breath. And I would not be here and being able to get through all my struggles in my life if it wasn't for faith. And so, I believe that we are all sinners. We all make mistakes, but I'm not taking my trauma and what I've went through and going back and re-victimizing somebody else. And so a lot of times, a lot of the offenders and the criminals, what they do is they basically say, especially in the Catholic faith, of which I am Catholic, that's one of my struggles, is that people can murder someone and then go to confession on Saturday and believe they're forgiven and then just go back out into the gang or in committing other crimes, and that's the way they live their life. I do believe in rehabilitation. I do. I'm thankful that people are going into the prisons and talking to them about faith in their heart and love and forgiveness, and I do believe in forgiveness. I've been able to forgive others in my life, including the guy that tried to kill me. And I've been able to forgive myself and many other people. But again, I do believe there's a difference in forgiveness and forgetting. I'll never forget what happened to me. I'm not going to go sit down and have lunch or dinner with the offender that tried to kill me. But I do believe in rehabilitation with the exception of 2 crimes. And I guess I have to answer to God for that, and that would be murder and molestation of a child. I find it very hard to believe that you could be rehabilitated when you molest children. But I also think that you cannot just go into a confessional and be forgiven and just go back onto your life without any help or support. I also believe that the reason we have so many homeless people, so much more mental illness, is because people are committing crimes and then they're thrown out on the streets without any support, guidance, rehabilitation. So do we need to get into the schools at a young age and talk to children about abuse and victimization and trauma and breaking the cycles? Yes, we need more of that. Do we need to get back to talk about faith and forgiveness and love? I think we've gotten too far away from faith and family.
I concur with you. I would say that as you're speaking, I'm thinking about the list in the New Testament that lists specific sins, Romans chapter 1, 1 Corinthians. And Paul says, and such were some of you, idolaters, fornicators, covetous, murderers, backbiters. I mean, just you name it, it's in there. But the good news is that the blood of Jesus Christ covers all that. And that is the hope. Jesus Christ is the true hope for us all, no matter where a person is at in life. As long as they have breath, there is no sin that Jesus' blood does not cover. Once again, I hasten to add, if you're a serial murderer, does that mean you open the door and say, okay, you're right with God now, see you, go ahead? No, it doesn't work that way. That's, there's some things, penalties that won't be undone. We don't want to send a wrong message to society that crime pays. We're kind of dealing that right now politically, where we're trying to get to the bottom of where the corruption is in D.C. and see that the people who have been truly guilty of plotting against the country are brought to justice. And so I see this in the same light, that there is, once again, the crime fits the punishment. And this is quite and once again, I can't help but think how difficult, how this must be for you to recount this, but it is a benefit to other victims. I'm sure there are people listening who have been victimized to one degree or another. And it's time that we say to the criminal justice system, the victim first. When somebody has been violated in any way, the consideration has to go to the victim. And we have to make the offender realize that this is not good, this is wrong. And we have to get that message through to society as well. There was a time when that stuff was looked down on, that was not condoned or brushed aside with indifference. It had a stigma attached to it. I'm not sure if it's still there anymore.
And we have to balance the scales of justice, if nothing else. I mean, it shouldn't be swayed so far. And, the stigma and the shame, and I hope in my lifetime that we don't see the stigma and the shame and the blame and the guilt that's absolutely put on victims day in and day out. The first thing you hear when someone was murdered, oh, was he in a bad neighborhood? No, he was at church. He was in a restroom. Oh, was she wearing a short skirt or showing a lot of cleavage when she was raped? Or, oh, was he beaten? Did he beat her because she didn't have dinner on the table at 5 o'clock? Or you hear a child molested and the first thing the neighbor comes out and says, oh, my God, it was such a nice neighbor. He was so nice, I find this hard to believe. And we need to stop that. We need to put the blame and the shame and the guilt onto the offender, and we need to have consequences for those behaviors.
That's a great point. You hear that on the news all the time, Patricia. I'm so shocked. So-and-so was such a nice guy. Well, obviously he wasn't. He just raped. There was a situation in a town a little bit further north from us where a little girl was brutally raped and thrown in a dumpster. And for me, I do believe in capital punishment, not indiscriminately, but something like that, I think, is worthy of capital punishment. And that's a heinous, evil crime. And a message needs to be sent out to people that this is completely unacceptable in society.
No, and who's taking responsibility when you have things like the Arnold tool? Who is taking ownership of that when these people are then being released because the computer basically said this person is no longer a high risk, released out, and then molested your child or your grandchild, and then they come back and say, but the Arnold tool said that he was a low risk. So is it the Arnold tool that's going to take responsibility for that? Is it our state legislators? Is it the Congress? Who is it that's going to take ownership of that? Because something's got to change. It cannot continue. And it seems to me that it's getting worse instead of getting better or balancing. And to me, I don't know how much worse it can get. It's absolutely offensive and so disappointing and re-victimizes victims and our families and our communities day in and day out.
You're right, Patricia. I have to agree with you because, and there's a double standard because young women in general have to think twice about where they go, what time of day they go. Should they go in groups? Because it has become more dangerous for young women to travel alone. Now, I'm not getting paranoid here, listeners. I'm not, watch out behind your back. But you cannot deny the fact that women are more at risk than they were, I would say, even 10, 15 years ago. Your thoughts on that?
I would say even 2 years ago or 5 years ago.
Wow.
I think even with the Me Too movement, even with Time's Up, I think we've gotten to a bad place. I think an unsafe place with the mass shootings, with families, children killing their parents, so many different things. I think women, we need to take it into our own hands. I believe in my Second Amendment right, but I believe in safety first. So if you're going to be able to get out there and protect yourself, make sure you know how to use it and to be safe about it. Whether you're using a taser, you're getting pepper spray, I suggest all women and children, and men for that matter too, to take a self-defense and safety class, know what to do, set up a safety plan in your home, key words to use if there is an emergency, to get a hold of family so that they know that you're in danger. Our organization is always happy to help with that, to support a safety plan, to support self-defense and safety, to support Second Amendment rights, to do whatever we can, but to also not only bring the awareness, the prevention, the advocacy, and the healing, but to let communities know, and especially women, it's okay to protect yourself. For some reason, women, we tend to curl up sometimes, and we don't go with our gut instinct and those red flags. And I always say, stick with it, because trust me, I didn't acknowledge my red flags and the gut feeling, and I almost lost my life. And so now I will stand up for myself, for my family, my friends, and I suggest all women do the same. Extremely well said, Patricia. I have nothing more to add to that except to say to our listeners, check out Patricia Wenskunas, her website at crimesurvivors.org. Patricia, I'm guessing that you are available for speaking engagements if people would want you to share your testimony in person. Is that so? Yes, absolutely. And they can go to patriciawenskunas.com or crimesurvivors.org, and they can find all the information. And I travel anywhere to do speakings or trainings, whether it be to individuals, small groups, large groups, to law enforcement, whatever it may be, that I can make an impact, one person, one family, one community at a time. Thank you so much, Patricia, for sharing your story. It's been very educational speaking with you, and God bless you in your future endeavors. Thank you, and God bless you too. With faith, there is hope. Yes, indeed. Thank you again. Listeners, stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. You're listening to It's a New Day here on WFYL 1180 Radio, working for your liberty and things that matter.